I want to be clear about something before we begin. I am not a superstitious man. I have worked in this profession for 19 years. I have read confessions from men who committed acts that would empty a church on Sunday morning. I have handled documents that governments on 2 continents would prefer no longer existed. I have sat across tables for men who smiled while describing things will not repeat in polite company or any other kind of company. I have, in the course of my work, become something of a connoisseur of human darkness. I say this not to impress you. I say it because what I am about to read to you comes from a source I have spent 4 months verifying, and I need you to understand that I do not bring you unverified material. I do not traffic in rumor. I do not deal in sensation. My clients pay for certainty, and certainty is what I provide. The document in my hands is a field dispatch, Army Corps of Engineers, Union Army, dated November the 19th, 1863. It is written in the hand of a Sergeant Wallace Pruitt, 5th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, detached to survey operations under the command of the Department of the Ohio. The dispatch was filed, stamped, received, and then, quite deliberately, I believe, buried inside a miscellaneous requisition log from a Cumberland Gap supply depot, where it sat for 16 years, until a clerk named Hartwell, who had a weakness for whiskey and an even greater weakness for gambling debts, sold it to a private collector in Cincinnati. That collector is my client. I acquired the document 11 weeks ago. I have since located 3 of the 4 men named in it. 2 are dead. 1, a former private, inmate Chester Dolan, now resident in a veterans home outside Knoxville, Tennessee, agreed to speak with me once for approximately 40 minutes, and then asked me to leave and never return. He was not rude about it. He was, if anything, too calm. The kind of calm that comes from a man who has made peace with something he cannot change. He confirmed the document is accurate. He also said before I left that he hoped I would consider not pursuing the matter further. When I asked him why, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Some doors, once you know where they are, you cannot stop looking at them." I thought about that on the train ride back from Knoxville. I'm still thinking about it. But I was hired to do a job, and so the document. I will read it as written, with minimal interruption. Sergeant Pruitt was not a literary man, but he was precise. Engineers tend to be precise. You will find the precision in this particular case does not make the reading easier. The dispatch begins with standard notation. 8. Unit designation. Weather conditions. Cold, overcast, intermittent fog in the valley floor. Then, scouting party of 4 men entered the eastern approach to the pass at approximately 0700 hours. Party consisted of myself, Corporal Aldous Marsh, Private Chester Dolan, and Private Thomas Reardon. Purpose of entry was to assess rockslide damage to the passage reported by local civilian contact 3 weeks prior and evaluate whether engineering intervention could restore the route for supply use. For context, and this is my interpolation, not Pruitt's, the pass in question had been used twice previously by Union forces moving through the Cumberland region. It was not a primary route. It was, however, valued for exactly the quality that makes mountain passes valuable in wartime. It was not on any map that the Confederacy was known to possess. A backdoor, in other words. The kind of route you keep in reserve for when your front doors are being watched. Civilian report of a rockslide had been treated, initially, as routine. Rockslides in that terrain were not uncommon, particularly in autumn, when freeze-thaw cycles begin working at the stone. The 4 men were sent to assess, not to alarm. Pruitt continues. We reached the obstruction at approximately 09:30. The civilian report had not conveyed the scale of the blockage. The slide had brought down a significant portion of the eastern canyon wall. Rough estimate, 40 to 60 feet of solid stone and rubble, floor to ceiling, completely sealing the passage. No gap, no partial opening. The wall was, for all practical purposes, total. He spends the next several lines doing what engineers do, which is measuring things. The width of the passage at the point of obstruction, the height of the debris wall, the approximate age of the slide based on weathering and moss growth. His conclusion, written in the flat language of a man describing inventory, is that the slide appeared to be at minimum 6 months old, possibly older, and that restoration of the passage would require substantial dynamite work and several weeks of labor. Then in Afrity, at approximately 10:15, temperature dropped sharply. I estimate the change at 15 to 20 degrees in under 2 minutes. There was no wind. Caper Marsh commented on the cold. I noted it in my field book. The fog on the valley floor, which had been retreating with the morning, began moving back toward us. I want to pause here for a moment, because this is where the document shifts. Up to this point, it reads like every engineering field report I have ever seen. After this point, it reads like something else entirely. Pruitt was clearly aware of this himself. The noticeable change in the handwriting, slightly larger, the letters less even, as if his hand was not entirely steady when he wrote the next section. He was, I think, trying to be an engineer about something that did not want to be engineered. He writes, Private Reardon heard it first. He held up his hand for silence and said quietly that he heard marching. I did not hear it initially. Then I did. A rhythmic sound, regular, boots on stone, in unison, coming from the direction of the obstruction, coming from inside the obstruction. Let me be precise about what he is saying. The solid rock wall, 40 to 60 feet of stone and compressed debris, sealed passage that had been sealed, by his own assessment, for at minimum half a year. Sound was coming from inside it. He writes, Corporal Marsh said it was an echo from elsewhere in the canyon. I considered this. The sound did not behave like an echo. It did not diminish or repeat. It grew louder, steadily, as if something was approaching from the other side. They moved back. All 4 of them, without discussion, moved back from the wall and positioned themselves behind a fall of boulders, perhaps 30 feet from the obstruction. Pruitt notes this with a touch of something, embarrassment, I think. He writes, this may appear to have been an overreaction. Then he writes nothing further in defense of the decision, which tells you everything. They waited. The temperature, he writes, continued to drop. And then, and here I will read his exact words, because I do not think my paraphrase would improve upon them. The wall opened. That is the only way I can describe what happened. It did not fall. It did not move. It simply ceased. In some manner I cannot explain, have any vocabulary available to me, to be a barrier. And through the space where the wall had been, they came. He does not write, they emerged, or they walked out. He writes, they came, as if the word emerged would imply too normal a process of transition, too ordinary a passage from one place to another. A regiment, full strength, or near to it, marching in column, 4 abreast, in perfect order, Union infantry, from their dress, moving at regulation pace. The sound of their boots, that rhythmic sound he had heard from inside the stone, now filled the canyon, orderly, precise, the sound of a unit that has drilled together for a long time. He pauses here in the writing, There is a gap in the text, a blank space of perhaps an inch, as if he put the pen down and then came back to it. I should describe what I saw more completely. The men, I will call them men, though I'm uncertain that is the correct word, were pale, the kind of pale that belongs to winter, to things that have not seen sun for a long time. They marched with their eyes forward, as men on parade do, but their eyes were not the eyes of men on parade. They were hollow. I do not mean that metaphorically. I mean that looking at their eyes was like looking into a room with no furniture and no light. There was depth there, but nothing in the depth. Corporal Marsh, who was beside me, made a sound. I put my hand on his arm. The regiment marched past them. All 4 scouts remained behind the boulders. The column passed close enough that Pruitt writes he could have reached out and touched the nearest man's coat. He did not. He describes the men in the column in more detail, and I will include this because I think it matters, though I confess it is the section I find most difficult to read aloud without stopping. He writes, "Their uniforms were consistent with Union infantry issue from approximately 1862, not degraded, not dirty, in the condition they would have been on the day they were issued. I noted this because it struck me as wrong in a way I could not immediately articulate. Men who have been marching, men who have been anywhere, accumulate evidence of having been there. Mud, wear, the ordinary marks of movement through a physical world. These men had none of that. They were as clean as the day they were outfitted, as if no time had passed. As if they had stepped from a quartermaster's depot that morning and begun their march, and the march had not yet had time to touch them." He also notes, and this is the detail I keep returning to, the one I wrote in my own notes in the margins of his dispatch, that none of the men in the column showed any sign of awareness that they were being watched. He writes, "I have observed men who are attempting not to see something, the deliberate avoidance, the peripheral glance. These men showed nothing of that. They did not avoid looking at us. They simply did not look, as if we were not there, as if the boulders we hid behind were not there, as if the entire eastern side of that canyon was not there. They looked only forward, only west. Their attention was entirely and completely occupied by wherever they were going." He pauses in the writing here. Then, I want to be precise about this, because I think it matters. They were not ignoring us. Ignoring requires awareness of the thing being ignored. They were not aware of us. We were outside the frame for whatever they were moving through. We were watching them, but they were somewhere else. Does that make sense? I am not certain it makes sense, but that is what I observed. I want to note something here that Pruitt himself notes, in a parenthetical aside, that is the single most unsettling sentence in an extremely unsettling document. He writes, "None of them cast shadows. It was mid-morning, clear enough between the fog banks for shadows. 4 living men crouched behind boulders, casting shadows on the stone. The regiment, columns of men, hundreds of them, marching in formation, cast none. The column took approximately 12 minutes to pass." Pruitt timed it on his watch because he was an engineer, and timing things was what he did when he did not know what else to do. 12 minutes. The tail of the column disappeared into the fog that had rolled back into the valley. The sound of boots continued for some time after the last man vanished. Then it stopped. "The temperature," he writes, "returned to normal within minutes." He writes, "We did not speak for some time. Then Private Reardon asked if anyone else had seen it. We confirmed that all 4 of us had seen it. Reardon said he thought he recognized the regimental insignia. I had not been close enough to see clearly. Reardon had. Reardon is from Kentucky and knows the units that have operated in this region. He said he believed the insignia belonged to the 12th Kentucky Infantry. I asked him what he knew about the 12th Kentucky. He said he knew they had gone missing in this region in the autumn of 1862. He said he had heard they were presumed lost in the mountains. He said he did not know the details. Pruitt knew the details. This is where the dispatch becomes something other than a field report. This is where Sergeant Wallace Pruitt, 5th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, engineer, precise man who measured things, sat down somewhere in the Cumberland Gap in November of 1863 and wrote something he must have known would be difficult for his superiors to receive. He writes, 12th Kentucky Infantry, approximately 400 men, under the command of Colonel Elias Brock, departed their position east of this pass in October of 1. They were ordered to move west through the pass to reinforce a position that was, by the time the order was given, already lost. The order was, in the opinion of many who have since reviewed it, an error. The regiment entered the pass. They did not emerge on the western side. A search was conducted. No survivors were found. No bodies were recovered. The pass was noted in subsequent reports as unstable and dangerous, and its use was discontinued. He pauses again. Another gap in the text. I believe the rockslide that sealed the eastern approach did not occur 6 months ago, as I initially assessed. I believe it occurred in October of 1862. I believe the 12th Kentucky Infantry entered this pass, and the mountain came down while they were inside it. I believe 400 men are entombed in this rock. I believe we have been looking at their grave for the past 3 hours. The dispatch ends here. Essentially, there are 2 more lines. The first is a recommendation, and I find this detail almost unbearable in its professionalism, that the pass be officially closed and marked as structurally compromised. The second line reads, I am filing this report because it is my duty to do so. I am aware of how it will be received. Now, my supplementary findings. The Army's response to Pruitt's dispatch was, as he predicted, skeptical. The official record notes only that the pass was inspected, found impassable due to rockslide damage, and marked closed pending future engineering assessment. The 4 men are listed as having completed their survey assignment without incident. No mention of what they reported seeing. The dispatch itself, as I said, was buried in a supply requisition log, where it sat for 16 years. In the spring of 1866, 3 years after Pruitt's dispatch, an Army engineering crew was sent to that pass, the different mandate, not to restore it, to permanently seal it. The order, which I have also obtained through separate channels at considerable expense, states that the work is being conducted for reasons of safety due to ongoing geological instability. That is the official reason. The engineering crew used dynamite, a significant quantity. They worked for 11 days. Their foreman filed a post-operation report. I have that document as well. The relevant section reads as follows. During excavation preliminary to final sealing, remains were encountered at depth. Specifically, at approximately 35 to 50 feet into the original debris field, the crew encountered what the attending surgeon identified as human skeletal remains, multiple individuals. The remains were consistent with military uniform fragments, though largely decomposed. Personal effects were also recovered, including buttons, buckles, and identification papers. The identification papers were legible, all names consistent with the roster of the 12th Kentucky Infantry. 400 men inside the rock, exactly where Pruitt said they would be. Exactly where the things that marched out of the wall had come from. The pass was sealed on May 14th, 1866. The remains of the foreman's report were sealed inside with it. The Army classified the engineering operation under a designation I will not reproduce here, which is to say, it was kind of classification that means we know this happened, and we have decided that you will not. I have spent 4 months with these documents. I have read them more times than I can accurately count. I have done what I do, which is to look for the explanation that does not require me to believe the impossible. I have not found one. What I have found is this: 4 living men crouched behind boulders in a sealed canyon and watched 400 dead men march past them, in formation, in silence, following an order that had been given more than a year before and had already cost them everything. The order was to march west through that pass, and so they were marching. In whatever manner they were still capable of, they were marching. They were still following orders that had already taken them into a mountain. The mountain had taken them, and it had not mattered, because the order was still the order. And the dead, it seems, do not get to stop following orders just because they are dead. That's the horror, I think, not the hollow eyes, though those are difficult enough. Not the absence of shadows, though I find I think about that more than I would like. The horror is the obedience. The horror is the precision. The horror is 400 men moving in perfect formation, in perfect silence, toward a position that no longer existed, for a battle that had already been fought and lost without them. They never knew they did not make it, or, and this is the thought that keeps me at my desk past midnight more often than I care to admit, they knew, and it did not matter. The orders had been given, and so they marched. The pass is sealed. The Army has no official record of what happened there. Sergeant Wallace Pruitt died in 1871. Of causes his death record describes as natural. His personal journal, which I have also obtained, contains a single entry after November of 1863 that refers to the event. It is brief. It reads, "Dreamed of the pass again. They were still marching." Just the one line. He never wrote about it again. Either because he had resolved it in himself, or because he had learned, as men sometimes do with certain things, that writing about it only made it more present. Corporal Aldous Marsh died in 1008, a farming accident, according to the county record in rural Ohio. I have no reason to doubt the record. Private Thomas Reardon. I have not been able to locate Thomas Reardon. He is not in the veterans' pension rolls. He is not in the death records I have been able to access across 4 states. He does not appear in any document I have found after November of 1863. Given what I now know about this matter, I find I do not want to speculate about why. There are explanations. I do not care for any of them. The Chester Dolan 855, residing in a veterans home outside Knoxville, Tennessee, who told me some doors, once you know where they are, you cannot stop looking at them. I want to tell you one thing about that meeting that does not appear in any document. Dolan heard me out. He sat by a window with his hands on his knees and let me explain what I have found, and then he was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought he might simply wait until I gave up and left. Then he said, "It happened, just that." Not I remember it differently. Not I am not sure what we saw. It happened, the way man confirms something that was never in question for him personally, only for the rest of the world. I asked if there was anything he remembered that was not in Pruitt's report. He looked out the window for a while. Then he said, near the middle of the column, one of them turned his head just slightly, not toward us, not toward anything he could see. Just a small movement, like a man who hears something distant and wonders what it is. Then he faced forward again and kept marching. I asked why that detail was not in Pruitt's report. He said Pruitt was a practical man. A practical man might decide that particular detail served no practical purpose. I asked him what he made of it. He looked at me for the first time in the conversation. He said, I have been trying not to make anything of it for 16 years. Then he asked me to leave. I closed the file 4 months ago. I opened it again the following morning. I have closed it and opened it more times than I can accurately count. I am a man who tracks down suppressed military reports for private clients, and what that means in practical terms is that I have spent 19 years learning where the locked doors are, learning how to open them. I have never before considered whether some doors are locked for reasons other than embarrassment or corruption, or the ordinary concealment of ordinary failures. I am considering it now. The regiment is still out there, I think, or whatever remains of them, still marching in whatever territory exists on the other side of a sealed mountain pass, in the Cumberland Gap, in autumn of 1863, moving in formation, moving in silence, following their last order through some geography that does not appear on any survey map I have ever reviewed, moving toward a position that fell before they ever reached it, through a pass that became their grave, for a cause that was already decided without their participation. I hope, for whatever it is worth to hope for the dead, that they eventually reach wherever they were ordered to go. I hope they are permitted to stand down. I suspect they are not. Sergeant Pruitt wrote that the sound continued after the last man vanished into the fog. Boots on stone, regular, fading. I close the file. I find I am listening.